Okay, so we've talked through what the basic outline of the practice is, and now some ideas on what areas of focus are. And my first suggestion, always a great area of focus that you can keep coming back to, is trying to create a complete argument. And it's really important. It's really what separates non-debaters from debaters, inexperienced debaters from very good debaters. Is not just can you make an argument, can you say something, but can you make a complete argument that explains what it is that you're talking about, that provides evidence, and that explains why it's important and compares it to the other side. And really the key to pushing this line of thinking is kind of being a pest. When the students make an argument, you want to follow up with them. You want to really push them. That they say something, and then you say, "Well, why is that true?" And then they maybe explain why it's true. And then you say, "Well, what does that mean? When you say this one thing, why should we believe that? What are you talking about?" Maybe sometimes you even say, "Well, why should we care about it? Let's say you're right. Suppose everything that you're saying is true. Why does that matter? Why do we care? What's the point of your argument?" So, um, obviously there's a limit to that, but you kind of want to channel your inner 5-year-old in a way, and just kind of say why, what does it mean, what are we doing, until you feel like either you need to chill out because they're starting to get frustrated, or you've pushed them to make a complete argument. So you can come back to that. And a basic principle of what a complete argument means is that it includes a claim, a warrant, and an impact. A claim is sort of a basic, usually just one sentence summary of what the argument is. It's the headline. Um, when you look at our pack, uh, what we call the tag, the line of explanation that's above the evidence, that's the claim. It's just a statement of what our argument is. A warrant is the explanation and evidence. So why should we believe the claim to be true? A more fuller description of what it is that we're saying in the claim, and ideally offering some evidence to be able to prove it. So in the pack, when we have a card, we have that sentence at the top, then usually there's some citation information, and then the block of text should provide the warrant. But even without the evidence or the pack, if you're just making an argument, you should be able to explain your argument and provide evidence for it as well. The evidence can be a story, an example, it can be a study, all sorts of things. It can just be using basic principles of logic to prove why your statement is true. And then the third part is the impact. What does it mean? Why should we care? What are the consequences of what you're saying? And then ideally, the strongest debate arguments are ones that have a comparison to the other side. And so not just why do we care about what I've just said, but why do we care more than the impact that the other side is claiming? Um, and a couple important ideas for that too. One is the great Ross Smith, who is the head coach at Wake Forest University for a long time, used to say that speed is not just the number of arguments that somebody makes in a speech, but the number of arguments that the other side has to answer. And that's a really important principle for your students to know about, especially as they start to move into JV and varsity, and see some of the older students talking a little bit faster and making a lot of arguments. You want to emphasize to them that there's really about quality and completeness of argument more so than just number of arguments. If you make 10 arguments, but they're not really complete, nobody knows what they mean, and the other side doesn't really have to answer them, you haven't been very effective. But if you make 3 really good arguments that are tough to answer, and then if the other team doesn't answer, they lose because you've explained the consequences in a way that's impactful to the judge, and you've compared them to the other side's impact. So the judge says, well, okay, maybe both sides win their impact, but one side has said to me why theirs is more important, so I have to vote for them. That's really more important. And another phrase when thinking about some of these impact questions is the idea of why do you win if you win what you win? And those are the kinds of questions you need to ask to students. Okay, you're trying to win this argument. Let's say you win it. Why does it mean you win the debate? What does it get you? What is this doing for you? And if it's not doing much for you, why are you investing some of your precious speech time on an argument that doesn't mean very much? Let's think about what are the arguments that we can do the most with, that we can demonstrate are the most important to the judge and that we can make good comparisons on. For example, say you're discussing climate change, and a student says, well, we should be really worried about climate change because it's going to increase the number and severity of storms that happen. Okay, if they stop there, they haven't made a very complete argument or a very compelling argument. You could kind of say, well, all right, so there's more storms that happen. What's wrong with storms? Storms happen all the time. You go inside, it rains, whatever. And then you got to push them. The student should say, well, these aren't kind of like your average storms. These are really severe storms where houses will be destroyed, the electrical grid will be shut down, sanitation will get messed up, there won't be clean water, people won't have enough to eat, there'll be an increased chance of diseases, they'll lose their homes, some people might drown. Push them to really say what the problem is. And then, of course, then why is that a bigger problem than whatever the other side's talking about? And really, you want to get the idea in their head that we're trying to differentiate a debater from any random person making arguments. We want them to develop an identity of what a debater is and take pride in that a debater is not just somebody who strenuously shouts and shakes their fists and makes an argument. That's not really a debater. A debater is somebody who has complete thoughts, who proves things, who pushes argumentations. So an example is, say, universal health care. Anybody can say, well, we shouldn't have universal health care because it'll collapse the economy. And it's one of the problems with our political debates is people just kind of say stuff. Anybody can say that, but you're not really a debater if you just say that. You have to give some reasons. So push them. Say they say we shouldn't have universal health care because it'll collapse the economy. Okay, why? And then help them kind of come up with the idea that, well, if we have universal health insurance, then it'll require a big increase in taxes in order to pay for the increased coverage. Okay, well, how do we know that to be true? Is there some evidence of how much it would cost to have universal health care? Some explanation of why existing budgets or deficit spending aren't enough to solve it? Then you have to say why we should be more concerned about economic consequences than a lack of coverage in healthcare, which is generally the basic benefit of universal healthcare. So they would have to talk about the harms, the problems of economic decline that would come from raising taxes. That could be unemployment. It could be an increase in homelessness and hunger. Maybe if the economy really gets so bad, it'll collapse the existing healthcare system. So there'll be even more gaps in coverage in a really messed up economy with a lot of taxes than just in the current system we have now, and it'll get worse. So keep pushing them further and further to see the difference between just saying stuff and debating. And watching political debates, which there are plenty coming up, is a good way to demonstrate that point. I'm very frustrated when I watch political debates because it's like, well, nobody's really proving what they're saying, and they're not providing evidence, and they're not making complete arguments. They're just kind of yelling at each other. And hopefully your debaters will be frustrated by that as well, and it will inspire them to do better. A way to apply that to the template that I talked about before, some examples. Let's say during the personal portion, you pair the students up and have two of the students come in front of the whole group and have a debate about which breakfast food is better. So say some student says that eggs are the best breakfast item. Okay, and maybe that's all they say. Then you have to say, well, why are eggs the best breakfast item? And hopefully they'll come up with something like, because they're delicious and they're healthy. Okay, why are eating eggs healthy? And then maybe they'll say, well, they're low in carbs and high in protein. Then you have to say, okay, well, why does that matter? Then say, well, compare that to cereal. Cereal's high in fiber. Eggs don't have any fiber at all. So why should we care more about protein than fiber? And on some of these questions, maybe they don't know. So you can kind of gently help them out, or maybe that's a good incentive for them to do some research. Next practice, have them come back with an answer. Have them figure out why we might care more or less about fiber as opposed to carbs and protein. Push them to do some research, to ask parents or teachers or that sort of thing. With the pack portion of the practice, you can apply it to different parts of the pack. So let's say one practice, you focus on the fill-in argument that if the United States doesn't sell arms, then China or Russia will sell arms instead. So push them on the impact of that. One thing that's part of the pack is not just to say that it'll be the same as the status quo because China or Russia will sell arms, but that it'll be worse. So why will it be worse? Well, because the arms that China and Russia sell will have less restrictions on what they can sell, so they can give them more destructive weapons, that the relationships that get formed might be more destructive with those countries cooperating with Russia and China than it would be if they were just cooperating with the United States. So push them on explanations, looking at the evidence that's in the pack, maybe doing their own research if necessary, looking at the extension arguments that's in the pack to try to come up with really complete arguments about those issues, to say it's not just that China and Russia fill in, but it's worse, and compare that to what's going on right now, and then apply that to some of the other negative and affirmative arguments in the pack.